Sarah Chen pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped out of the downtown office building. The Seattle rain had started again, creating that familiar mist that made everything look like a watercolor painting. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement as she hurried toward the street corner, phone already in hand, requesting an Uber. It had been another brutal 14-hour day at the law firm. The Henderson case was consuming her life, but if she could win this corporate lawsuit, it would make her career. At 28, she was already one of the youngest associates at Morrison & Associates, but she wanted more. She wanted her name on the door. The blue Toyota Camry pulled up exactly 3 minutes later, just as the app had promised. Sarah glanced at her phone to confirm the license plate before sliding into the back seat. The interior was immaculate, which was unusual for a rideshare vehicle. Most Uber cars she'd been in smelled like a combination of air freshener and previous passengers' food. This one smelled like leather cleaner and something else she couldn't identify. Something clean and sharp. "Sarah?" the driver asked, turning slightly to look at her. He was older than the typical Uber driver, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair cut short and precise. His voice carried a slight accent she couldn't place, and his eyes were the kind of blue that seemed to notice everything. "That's me," she confirmed, settling into the seat and immediately pulling out her phone to continue working on case notes. 2247 Pine Street, please." "You got it," he said, pulling smoothly into traffic. "Long day at the office?" Sarah looked up from her phone, surprised by the question. Most drivers either didn't talk at all or played music loud enough to discourage conversation. This man seemed genuinely interested, but not in an intrusive way. "Yeah, you could say that," she replied, studying his profile as he navigated through the evening traffic. There was something about the way he held himself, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, that seemed different from other drivers. More alert, more professional. "I'm Marcus," he said, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "Been driving for about 6 months now. Still getting used to the city traffic." "Are you new to Seattle?" Sarah asked, finding herself drawn into conversation despite her intention to work during the ride. "Recently relocated," Marcus replied, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors and the road ahead. "Needed a change of scenery. Driving gives me time to learn the city, meet people. Keeps me busy." Sarah noticed that Marcus took a slightly different route than what her GPS suggested, but the traffic seemed lighter on his chosen path. He clearly knew what he was doing. They drove through the Capitol Hill neighborhood, past the trendy restaurants and coffee shops that defined Seattle's cultural scene. "You live around here?" Marcus asked as they stopped at a red light. "Just moved to Pine Street last month," Sarah said. "Still getting used to the neighborhood myself. I used to live in Belltown but wanted something quieter." Marcus nodded, but Sarah noticed his attention had shifted. He was looking more frequently in his mirrors, his posture more rigid. The light turned green, but instead of immediately accelerating, he paused for a moment, scanning the intersection. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, a slight unease creeping into her voice. "Just being careful," Marcus replied, but his tone had changed. There was an edge to it now, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. As they continued down Pine Street, Sarah noticed that Marcus had begun taking more turns, extending what should have been a direct route to her apartment. When she was about to question the detour, she saw his eyes flash to the rearview mirror again, this time with unmistakable concern. "Marcus?" she said, but he held up a hand for silence. The city lights blurred past as Marcus made another unexpected turn, this time more sharply. Sarah looked back through the rear window and saw what had caught Marcus's attention. A black SUV with tinted windows, following at exactly the same distance they had maintained for the last several blocks. "Are we being followed?" Sarah whispered, her heart beginning to race. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he made a series of quick turns, weaving through a residential area. The SUV stayed with them, making the same turns with practiced precision. This wasn't a coincidence. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice now completely transformed from the friendly driver she had met 15 minutes earlier. It was calm but commanding, the voice of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." The fear in Sarah's chest expanded as she realized that her ordinary Tuesday evening was about to become anything but ordinary. She had no idea that getting into this particular Uber would change not just her night, but her entire understanding of the world around her. Marcus accelerated, and Sarah gripped the door handle as they took another sharp turn. The black SUV was still behind them, and now she could see that there might be a second vehicle joining the pursuit. The black SUV accelerated, closing the distance between them. Marcus's hands moved over the steering wheel with precision that spoke of extensive training. Sarah watched in growing terror as the vehicle behind them pulled alongside, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like dark mirrors. "Marcus, what's happening?" Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke. "Who are these people?" "Stay calm," Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving the road. "Do you have any idea why someone might want to follow you? Any cases you're working on that might have made enemies?" Sarah's mind raced through her recent work. The Henderson case involved a major pharmaceutical company, accused of covering up dangerous side effects, but surely that wouldn't. Her thoughts were interrupted as the SUV swerved closer, nearly clipping their side mirror. "The Henderson case," she whispered, "but that's just a civil lawsuit. People don't get killed over. They do when there's enough money involved." Marcus cut her off, making a sharp right turn that threw Sarah against the door. "How much is this case worth?" $800 million, Sarah said, the number sounding enormous in the confined space of the car. "Maybe more if we can prove they knew about the deaths." Marcus cursed under his breath in what sounded like multiple languages. "That's more than enough," he said grimly. The SUV had fallen back during the turn but was now accelerating to catch up. Through the rear window, Sarah could see a second vehicle, a dark sedan, joining the pursuit from a side street. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. "Should I call 911? She asked. "Not yet," Marcus said. "These people have resources. Local response might not be enough, and we don't know how deep this goes." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean, how deep this goes? Who are you?" Before Marcus could answer, the passenger window of the SUV rolled down. Sarah caught a glimpse of metal reflecting the streetlights. "Get down," Marcus shouted, his voice carrying such authority that Sarah immediately threw herself to the floor without question. The rear window exploded in a shower of safety glass as the first shot rang out. Marcus yanked the steering wheel hard to the left, sending the Toyota careening across 2 lanes of traffic. Horns blared around them as other vehicles swerved to avoid collision. "Stay down," Marcus commanded, reaching under his seat with one hand while steering with the other. "Don't lift your head no matter what you hear." Sarah pressed herself against the floor, her face against the carpet that smelled like cleaning solution and something else. Gun oil, she realized with shock. Her legal mind, trained to notice details, was cataloging everything even as terror flooded her system. More shots followed, but Marcus was driving like someone who had done this before. He downshifted and accelerated through a gap between 2 buses, using their bulk as temporary cover. The Toyota's engine roared as he pushed it beyond its normal limits. "How are you doing this?" Sarah shouted over the sound of screeching tires and another gunshot. "Professional development," Marcus replied tersely, taking a turn so sharp that the car went up on 2 wheels for a terrifying moment before slamming back down. Through the space between the seats, Sarah saw Marcus pull something from under his seat, a gun that definitely hadn't come from any sporting goods store. It was matte black and looked like something from a military arsenal. "Who are you?" she demanded again. "Someone who's very good at staying alive," Marcus said, checking his mirrors again. "And right now, that's all that matters." The SUV had kept pace with them despite Marcus's evasive driving. The sedan had positioned itself to cut off their escape routes. Sarah realized with growing horror that these weren't random criminals. They were organized, professional, and very determined. "They're hurting us," Marcus muttered, and Sarah heard something in his voice that chilled her. Not fear, but recognition. "This is a coordinated operation." As if to confirm his words, a third vehicle, another sedan, appeared ahead of them, blocking the intersection they were approaching. Marcus didn't slow down. "Hold on," he said, and Sarah grabbed whatever she could reach as Marcus aimed the Toyota directly at the blocking vehicle. At the last second, the blocking sedan moved, but not fast enough. Marcus clipped its rear bumper, sending it spinning as they shot through the intersection. The impact threw Sarah against the back of the front seat, but she managed to stay down. "The freeway," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. "If we can reach the freeway." But as they approached the on-ramp, Sarah saw what Marcus had already spotted: more vehicles waiting. Black SUVs and sedans positioned at strategic points, ready to continue the pursuit or cut them off entirely. "They knew our route," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new note of respect for their pursuers. "This wasn't improvised. Sarah's phone rang, the sound jarring in the chaos. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. "Don't answer it," Marcus said immediately. But the phone kept ringing, insistent and ominous in the damaged car. Finally, Sarah looked at Marcus. What if it's them? What if they want to talk? Marcus considered for a moment, then nodded grimly. "Put it on speaker, but let me do the talking." Sarah answered the call, her finger trembling as she hit the speaker button. A calm, professional voice filled the car. "Mr. Torres," the voice said, and Sarah saw Marcus's jaw tighten at the use of his name. "This can end very simply. Pull over and no one else gets hurt." The voice on the phone was unnaturally calm, as if discussing dinner plans rather than a high-speed chase through Seattle streets. Marcus's expression darkened as he recognized something in the speaker's tone, the controlled confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what they wanted. "Rodriguez," Marcus said, his own voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Still hiding behind hired guns, I see." Sarah's eyes widened. These men knew each other. This wasn't a random attack on a lawyer working a pharmaceutical case. This was something much more personal and dangerous. "You know why I'm here, Torres," Rodriguez continued through the phone speaker. "You took something that doesn't belong to you. Return it, and the girl walks away unharmed." "I don't have anything of yours," Marcus replied, swerving around a delivery truck while keeping one eye on the pursuing vehicles. "And her name is Sarah. She's an innocent civilian." "Innocent?" Rodriguez laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "She's about to cost my employers $800 million. There's nothing innocent about that." Sarah felt her world tilting on its axis. "This is about the Henderson case?" she whispered. "Your pharmaceutical lawsuit is about to expose some very uncomfortable truths," Rodriguez explained, as if she hadn't spoken. "Deaths that certain people would prefer to keep buried. Evidence that should never see the light of day." Marcus made a series of rapid turns, heading toward the industrial district where the streets were wider, and there would be fewer civilians in danger. "Since when do you work corporate security, Rodriguez?" "Last I heard, you were still playing soldier of fortune in Eastern Europe. Times change. Money talks. And right now it's saying that you and your passenger need to disappear." The pursuing SUV accelerated, trying to force them toward a dead-end street, but Marcus anticipated the move. He spun the steering wheel hard right, sending the Toyota into a controlled slide that would have impressed a stunt driver. The maneuver put them temporarily out of the SUV's firing line. "Tell me something, Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice taking on a conversational tone that seemed insane given their circumstances. "How many people did you bring for this job?" "Enough," came the reply. "That's what you said in Karachi," Marcus said. "Right before half your team ended up in body bags." Sarah heard something change in the silence that followed, a tension that suggested old wounds and unfinished business. "That was different," Rodriguez said finally. "That was war." "This is war too," Marcus replied. "You just picked the wrong civilian to target." As if responding to his words, Marcus reached across to the glove compartment and pulled out what looked like a military-grade communications device. He spoke into it rapidly in what Sarah recognized as Spanish, but too fast and technical for her to follow. "Who are you calling?" she whispered. "Insurance," Marcus replied tersely. The SUV had closed the distance again, and Sarah could see the muzzle of another weapon extending from the passenger window. But before the shooter could take aim, Marcus made an unexpected move. He slammed on the brakes. The sudden deceleration threw the SUV past them, and Marcus immediately accelerated again, now behind his pursuers. For a moment, the hunter had become the hunted. "Torres, you can't run forever." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the phone. "And you can't protect her and fight us at the same time." "Watch me," Marcus said, and Sarah heard something in his voice that made her believe he might actually pull this off. They were approaching the waterfront now, where massive container ships created a maze of shadows and hiding places. Marcus seemed to know exactly where he was going, taking turns without hesitation even though Sarah was certain he'd never driven this route before. "How do you know these streets so well?" she asked. "Reconnaissance," Marcus replied. "Old habits. What kind of old habits?" Before Marcus could answer, the communications device crackled to life. A voice spoke in rapid Spanish, and Marcus's expression shifted from grim determination to something that might have been relief. 2 minutes, he told Sarah. "We just need to stay alive for 2 more minutes." The sedan that had been blocking their earlier escape route appeared ahead of them again, positioned between two shipping containers in what was clearly meant to be a final roadblock. But Marcus didn't slow down. Instead, he reached under his seat again and pulled out what looked like a small, cylindrical object. "Close your eyes and cover your ears," he ordered. Sarah complied just as Marcus threw the object through his open window. Even with her eyes closed and ears covered, the flashbang grenade was overwhelming. Light seared through her eyelids, and the sound was like standing inside a cannon. When her vision cleared, the sedan was sitting sideways across the road, its occupants stumbling around in obvious disorientation. Marcus drove around them like they were traffic cones. "Where did you get military-grade flashbangs?" Sarah shouted. "Amazon," Marcus replied deadpan, and despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. They emerged from the container maze onto a stretch of waterfront road. In the distance, Sarah could see what looked like a helicopter approaching, its searchlight cutting through the evening sky. "Please tell me that's the good guys," she said. Marcus checked his communications device. "That depends on your definition of good guys," he said. "But they're my guys." The pursuing vehicles had regrouped and were closing in for what was clearly intended to be a final assault. The SUV and both sedans approached from different angles, trying to box them in against the water. Rodriguez's voice came through the phone one last time. "Last chance, Torres. We can do this easy or hard." Marcus looked at Sarah in the rearview mirror, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. A coldness that spoke of decisions made in situations where other people's lives hung in the balance. "Rodriguez," Marcus said calmly, "you really should have brought more men." The helicopter was almost overhead now, and Sarah could see ropes beginning to deploy from its open doors. The helicopter descended with military precision, its rotor wash creating a whirlwind of dust and debris that forced the pursuing vehicles to slow their approach. Sarah watched in amazement as black-clad figures fast-roped down from the aircraft, landing in tactical formation around their position. These weren't police officers or emergency responders. They moved with the fluid coordination of elite soldiers, establishing a defensive perimeter in seconds. Each wore tactical gear that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and their weapons were nothing like what she'd seen in movies. "Bravo, team. This is Torres." Marcus spoke into his communications device. "Package is secure. Hostiles are 3 vehicles, approximately 12 personnel armed and dangerous." "Copy that, Colonel," came the immediate response through the speaker. "We have eyes on all targets." Sarah's mind reeled. "Colonel?" Her Uber driver was a colonel? The lead SUV tried to retreat, but one of the tactical team members stepped into its path and raised what looked like a small cannon. The vehicle's front tires exploded simultaneously, sending it skidding sideways into a shipping container. "Torres, this isn't over." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the phone, but now there was something different in his tone. Uncertainty replacing the earlier confidence. "Actually, Rodriguez, it is," Marcus replied. "You made a critical error in intelligence gathering." "What error?" Marcus smiled for the first time since the pursuit began. "You assumed I was just an Uber driver." Through the Toyota's damaged windows, Sarah watched as the tactical team moved in on the disabled vehicles with overwhelming efficiency. The pursuers, who had seemed so dangerous and professional minutes earlier, were being systematically neutralized by people who operated on an entirely different level. Colonel Marcus Torres, one of the tactical team members, approached their car, speaking through the driver's window. "Sir, we have the situation contained. Multiple suspects in custody, no friendly casualties." Sarah stared at Marcus, Colonel Torres, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "You're military," she said, though it came out more as a question. "Was military," Marcus corrected, finally holstering the weapon she'd seen him draw. "Now I'm something else entirely." "Which is?" Before Marcus could answer, another figure approached the car, a woman in a dark suit who moved with the same purposeful stride as the tactical team, but carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to giving, rather than taking, orders. "Colonel Torres," she said, extending her hand through the window. "Director Sarah Webb, Department of Homeland Security, Special Operations Division." Sarah's head was spinning. "There are 2 Sarahs now?" Director Webb smiled. "Ms. Chen, I apologize for the confusion and the terror you've experienced tonight. You've inadvertently stumbled into an ongoing federal investigation." "The Henderson case?" Sarah asked. The Henderson case is the tip of the iceberg, Webb explained. Your pharmaceutical lawsuit uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that reaches far beyond corporate misconduct. We're talking about international money laundering, arms trafficking, and the systematic elimination of witnesses. Marcus stepped out of the car, and Sarah noticed for the first time how he carried himself. Not like an Uber driver, not even like a soldier, but like someone accustomed to command authority in the most dangerous situations imaginable. Ms. Chen, Webb continued, the people who targeted you tonight represent a network we've been tracking for 3 years. Your legal work threatened to expose financial connections that would have brought down some very powerful people. Sarah emerged from the car on shaky legs, looking around at the scene that resembled something from an action movie. So Marcus, Colonel Torres, he was what, protecting me? In a manner of speaking, Webb said. Colonel Torres has been conducting surveillance on subjects related to your case. When our intelligence indicated that you might be targeted, he positioned himself to provide protection. By driving Uber, Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. Marcus finally spoke up. It's the perfect cover. Ubiquitous, invisible, with legitimate reasons to be anywhere in the city at any time. No one suspects the guy picking up rides at the airport. But how did you know I would call for a ride tonight? We didn't, Marcus admitted. I've been monitoring your general area for the past week, accepting rides in your neighborhood. Tonight was coincidence, good timing as it turned out. Director Webb pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of surveillance photos. The Rodriguez that Colonel Torres was speaking with leads a mercenary organization that specializes in corporate problem solving. They've been linked to 17 suspicious deaths across 4 countries, all involving people who threatened to expose corporate wrongdoing. Sarah studied the photos, faces of people who looked like ordinary citizens. These people are all dead? Every one of them, Webb confirmed. Accidents, suicides, random crimes, never anything that could be traced back to their employers or the cases they were working on. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. I was going to be number 18. Not on my watch, Marcus said quietly. Sarah looked at this man who had been driving her to what she thought was her apartment, what Rodriguez had clearly intended to be her death. So what are you exactly? CIA Special Forces? Former Special Forces currently working with a joint task force that doesn't officially exist, Marcus said. We handle situations where normal law enforcement isn't enough. Like corporate assassins chasing lawyers through downtown Seattle? Exactly like that. Director Webb stepped closer. Ms. Chen, I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Your Henderson case has exposed a network that generates over $2 billion annually in illegal revenue. These people will try again. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Try again? Which is why, Marcus said, you're going to need protection until we can dismantle the entire organization. Protection from who? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Marcus smiled, the same friendly smile she'd seen when she first got into his car. But now she understood what lay behind it. Well, I do have excellent reviews as an Uber driver. 5 stars across the board. Despite everything, Sarah found herself laughing. This is insane. Welcome to my world, Marcus said. Though I should mention, your Henderson case just became a federal investigation. You're about to have more resources at your disposal than most small countries. Director Webb nodded. And Colonel Torres will be your primary protection detail. Think of him as your new shadow. Sarah looked around at the tactical team, the helicopter, the disabled vehicles, and the man who had somehow transformed from a friendly Uber driver into her personal guardian in the space of 30 minutes. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Marcus said, we finish what they started, but this time we're hunting them. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in a secure conference room in a building that officially didn't exist, located somewhere in the industrial district of Seattle. The windows were bulletproof. The walls were lined with materials that prevented electronic surveillance. And the coffee was surprisingly good for a secret government facility. Marcus sat across from her, no longer the friendly Uber driver, but not quite the military operative either. He had changed into civilian clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but somehow still managed to look like someone who could handle any crisis that walked through the door. You're probably wondering how a Special Forces colonel ends up driving Uber in Seattle, Marcus said, settling back in his chair with a cup of coffee. The thought had crossed my mind, Sarah admitted, along with about 1,000 other questions. Director Webb spread a file across the table between them. Colonel Torres's story is classified at the highest levels, but given your situation, you need to understand who's protecting you. Sarah opened the file and immediately understood why the classification was necessary. Marcus Torres had served in military operations across 3 continents, with commendations from countries whose names she couldn't pronounce. The photographs showed him in various settings: desert combat, urban warfare, diplomatic protection details, always with the same calm, focused expression she'd seen during their escape. Army Special Forces for 12 years, Marcus began, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone recounting facts rather than memories. Started as a regular infantry soldier, but I had a talent for languages and tactical thinking. Ended up in units that handled situations where conventional military approaches weren't sufficient. Meaning? Sarah asked. Hostage rescue, counterterrorism, protection of high-value targets in hostile environments. Sometimes we were officially there. Sometimes we weren't. Director Webb turned a page in the file, revealing a photograph of Marcus in dress uniform, receiving a medal from someone Sarah recognized as a former Secretary of Defense. Colonel Torres was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for actions in Afghanistan that resulted in the successful extraction of 12 civilian aid workers from a Taliban compound. That was a team effort, Marcus said quietly. Good people died in that operation, including your unit commander, Webb added, which is when Colonel Torres made the decision to leave active duty. Sarah studied Marcus's face, noting the shadow that crossed his features at the mention of his commander. You blamed yourself. I blamed the system, Marcus corrected. We kept being sent into situations that could have been prevented with better intelligence, better planning, better support. Good soldiers dying because politicians and bureaucrats couldn't see past their next election cycle. So you became a private military contractor? Sarah guessed. For about 18 months, Marcus confirmed. But that was worse. At least in the Army, we were fighting for something beyond money. In the private sector, everything comes down to the highest bidder. Director Webb pulled out another photograph, this one showing Marcus in civilian clothes, standing next to a woman and 2 children in what looked like a refugee camp. That's when Colonel Torres came to our attention. He was working for a private security firm in Syria, but instead of just protecting his employer's assets, he organized an evacuation that saved over 300 civilians. It was the right thing to do, Marcus said simply. The company disagreed. They fired him, Webb explained. Which is when I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Sarah looked between them. Which was? A chance to use his skills for something that mattered, Marcus said. Director Webb runs a unit that handles threats that fall between the cracks of traditional law enforcement and military operations. Situations where the FBI doesn't have jurisdiction, the CIA can't operate domestically, and the military can't be officially involved. We handle the gray areas, Webb added, and there are more gray areas than you might think. Sarah flipped through more pages of Marcus's file, seeing operations across the globe with names like Operation Silent Guardian and Project Shepherd. The details were heavily redacted, but the pattern was clear. Marcus specialized in protecting innocent people from very dangerous enemies. So the Uber driving? Sarah asked. Marcus smiled. Was supposed to be temporary. We needed someone to monitor potential threats to federal witnesses in the Seattle area. Driving rideshare let me move around the city without attracting attention, get close to subjects, and maintain surveillance without appearing suspicious. But you've been doing it for 6 months, Sarah pointed out. Because he's good at it, Webb said, and because he actually likes the work. Tell her about the other passengers, Colonel. Marcus looked slightly embarrassed. In 6 months of driving, I've prevented 2 muggings, stopped 1 domestic violence incident, and helped reunite a missing teenager with her family. Turns out, driving Uber in a major city gives you a front-row seat to a lot of human drama. And all of this prepared you for tonight, how exactly? Sarah asked. The Rodriguez organization has been on our radar for 3 years, Webb explained. We knew they were planning something in Seattle, but we didn't know the target until tonight. When I realized you were Sarah Chen, the lawyer working the Henderson case, everything clicked, Marcus continued. I'd been briefed on your lawsuit because of its potential national security implications. When I saw that SUV start following us, I knew exactly what was happening. Sarah shook her head in amazement.
So my getting into your car specifically was just incredible luck?
Or fate, Marcus said. Depends on your perspective. Director Webb closed the file. What matters now is that you're alive and we have an opportunity to take down an organization that's been operating with impunity for far too long. Using me as bait, Sarah said. The reality of her situation settling in. Using your case as leverage, Webb corrected. Your evidence against the pharmaceutical company is solid. But with what we've learned about their connection to Rodriguez's organization, we can build a RICO case that will bring down the entire network. Marcus leaned forward. Sarah, I want you to understand something. The people who came after you tonight, they don't give up. They don't negotiate. They don't leave loose ends. Under normal circumstances, they would keep trying until they succeeded. But these aren't normal circumstances, Sarah said slowly. No. Marcus smiled. These aren't normal circumstances, because now they're not just dealing with a lawyer working a civil case. They're dealing with a joint federal task force that specializes in making very dangerous people disappear. Sarah looked at the classified files, the secure facility, and the man who had saved her life while maintaining the perfect cover of an ordinary rideshare driver. So what happens next? Next, Director Webb said, we go on the offensive. And you get to watch Colonel Torres do what he does best, which is? Marcus's expression shifted back to the cold professionalism she'd seen during the chase. Hunt the hunters, he said quietly, and make sure they never threaten innocent people again, Era. Realized that her ordinary Tuesday night had not just changed her life, it had made her part of something much larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But looking at Marcus Torres, she felt something she hadn't expected. Safe. 2 weeks after the night that changed everything, Sarah sat in a downtown Seattle office that looked like any other law firm, except for the subtle security measures that Marcus had taught her to notice. The receptionist wore an earpiece, the windows were bulletproof, and every person entering the building passed through scanners that detected more than just metal. Her Henderson case had transformed overnight from a corporate lawsuit into the cornerstone of the largest RICO investigation in Pacific Northwest history. What had started as a claim about hidden pharmaceutical side effects had evolved into evidence of a network that laundered money through dummy corporations, eliminated whistleblowers and corrupted officials across 3 countries. The pharmaceutical company was just the tip of the iceberg, Sarah explained to her former boss, David Morrison, who had driven across town for what he thought was a routine case update. They were using drug profits to fund Rodriguez's organization, which then provided services to other corporations facing similar lawsuits. David stared at the evidence spread across the conference table. Financial records, surveillance photos, intercepted communications. Most of it bearing classification stamps he'd never seen outside of movies. Sarah, how did you get access to all this? Federal partnership, Sarah said, though she couldn't tell him about the joint task force or Marcus's real identity. The Department of Justice realized that my civil case had uncovered criminal activity that threatened national security. Through the window, Sarah could see Marcus in the building across the street, maintaining his watch from what appeared to be a coffee shop but was actually an observation post. Even in civilian clothes, reading what looked like a newspaper, he radiated the quiet alertness that she'd learned to recognize as his natural state. And this Torres character who's been shadowing you, he's federal protection? David asked. Something like that, Sarah replied. It had become her standard answer to questions about Marcus's role. The truth that he was a former Special Forces colonel working for a classified task force while maintaining deep cover as an Uber driver would have sounded like fiction. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Movement on the Rodriguez front. Meeting in 20. David, I need to wrap this up, Sarah said, beginning to gather the non-classified portions of her evidence. The grand jury convenes next week and I need to prepare my testimony. Just promise me you're being careful, David said, his concern evident. This is way beyond normal corporate litigation. I have excellent protection, Sarah assured him, and she meant it. Over the past 2 weeks, she had learned that Marcus Torres was exceptionally good at his job. 40 minutes later, Sarah sat in the secure conference room that had become her second office, watching Director Webb brief a team of federal agents and prosecutors on their progress. against the Rodriguez organization. The pharmaceutical company has agreed to full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges, Webb reported. Their financial records have given us a complete picture of how the money flowed through the network. Marcus stood near the back of the room, no longer pretending to be anything other than what he was, a military professional whose presence made everyone else feel safer. Intelligence indicates that Rodriguez is planning to leave the country within 72 hours, he added. This is our window. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh leaned forward. What about the other targets? The judges, politicians, and executives who were on their elimination list? All under protection, Webb replied. Colonel Torres's team has established security details. For each person Rodriguez's organization had marked for termination. Sarah studied the list of names, 12 individuals, across 4 states who had been targeted for death simply because their work threatened the wrong people's profits. These are all ordinary citizens, she said. Environmental lawyers, safety inspectors, a pediatrician who reported unusual cancer clusters. People like you, Marcus said quietly. People who do their jobs with integrity without knowing that their honesty makes them enemies of very dangerous organizations. But now we know, Webb continued, and we have the opportunity to dismantle the entire network. The arrests begin tomorrow at 0600 hours, coordinated across 3 time zones. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. What's my role? You continue being yourself, Marcus answered. Your testimony to the grand jury proceeds as scheduled. The Rodriguez organization believes they're still hunting you, which gives us the advantage. They think I'm still vulnerable. They think you're a lawyer with limited protection, working a case you don't fully understand, Webb explained. They have no idea that their entire operation has been compromised. Marcus pulled up a surveillance photo on the conference room screen. Rodriguez in what appeared to be an expensive restaurant, meeting with a man in a business suit. This was taken yesterday in Vancouver. Rodriguez is coordinating with his employers, planning what they believe will be their final solution to the Sarah Chen problem. Which is a car bombing, Marcus said without emotion. Scheduled for tomorrow morning when you leave your apartment for the courthouse. Sarah felt the familiar chill of fear, but it was different now, tempered by confidence in the man who had saved her life and the team that surrounded her. Except I won't be leaving my apartment tomorrow morning. Correct, Webb confirmed. Your testimony has been rescheduled for security reasons. Instead of you going to the courthouse, Rodriguez's team will find themselves surrounded by federal agents who have been waiting in position since midnight. Marcus activated another screen showing what looked like a tactical deployment map. 6 arrest teams coordinated timing, with backup units positioned to prevent escape. Rodriguez and his entire Seattle operation will be neutralized before breakfast. And the people who hired them, Sarah asked, will be arrested simultaneously in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami, Webb said. Corporate executives, money launderers, and corrupt officials who thought they were above the law. Sarah looked around the room at the professionals who had dedicated themselves to bringing down this network. All because I filed a lawsuit about pharmaceutical side effects. All because you refused to be intimidated, Marcus corrected. Your courage to pursue the truth even when people started dying made this entire operation possible. I wasn't being courageous, Sarah protested. I was just doing my job. Sometimes, Marcus said, those are the same thing. Director Webb stood to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, at 600 hours tomorrow, we execute Operation Clean Sweep. 12 simultaneous arrests, seizure of assets valued at over $2 billion, and the dismantling of an organization that has operated with impunity for over a decade. As the briefing concluded and people filed out of the room, Marcus approached Sarah. How are you feeling about all this? Nervous, Sarah admitted. Excited, grateful, and still somewhat amazed that my Uber driver turned out to be a federal agent. Marcus smiled. Former Special Forces colonel working with a classified task force. Right. That. Sarah, Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious. After tomorrow, your life will change again. Rodriguez's organization will be gone, but you'll have a reputation as someone who took on powerful enemies and won. That brings its own challenges, meaning you'll probably get offers to handle cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. Whistleblowers, corruption cases, situations where doing the right thing puts you in danger. Sarah considered this. And if I accept those cases? Marcus's smile returned. Then you might need a driver who knows how to handle dangerous situations. Are you offering? Let's just say I've discovered that I enjoy protecting people who fight for justice. And Seattle has excellent rideshare opportunities. Sarah laughed, realizing that the man who had saved her life had also changed her understanding of what was possible when ordinary people refused to back down from extraordinary challenges. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in her new office on the 32nd floor of Columbia Center, looking out over Seattle's skyline through windows that were notably bulletproof. The brass nameplate on her door read, Chen & Associates Justice and Protection Legal Services, though most people simply called it the firm that takes on the impossible cases. Her phone buzzed with a familiar notification. Your Uber driver Marcus is arriving in 2 minutes. Sarah smiled as she gathered her files for the day's court appearance. Some things never changed. Operation Clean Sweep had been more successful than anyone had anticipated. Rodriguez and 43 members of his organization were facing federal charges ranging from conspiracy to murder to international money laundering. The pharmaceutical company at the center of her original Henderson case had paid an $850 million settlement and agreed to unprecedented safety monitoring. But the real victory was in the ripple effects. The network's collapse had exposed corruption in 3 federal agencies, led to the resignation of 2 senators, and prompted congressional hearings on corporate influence in law enforcement. Most importantly, 12 people who had been marked for assassination were still alive. Sarah's new firm specialized in exactly the type of cases that Marcus had predicted: whistleblowers, environmental activists, safety inspectors, and journalists who found themselves in danger for doing their jobs with integrity. Word had spread through networks of attorneys and activists that if you needed legal representation and personal protection, Sarah Chen was the lawyer to call. The elevator chimed and Director Webb stepped out, carrying a briefcase that probably contained another case file marked with classification stamps. Over the past 6 months, Webb had become a regular visitor, bringing federal cases that needed an attorney who understood the intersection of law and national security. Sarah, Webb greeted her. I have something I think will interest you. Remember the environmental lawyer in Portland who's been receiving death threats over the pipeline lawsuit? Amanda Rodriguez, no relation to our Rodriguez, Sarah said. The threats escalated to attempted kidnapping as of yesterday. The perpetrators were using the same methodology as the organization we dismantled, which suggests someone is trying to rebuild the network. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of apprehension and determination that had become her normal response to dangerous cases. Do we know who? We have suspicions. But what we need is someone who can represent Ms. Rodriguez while we investigate. Someone with experience in cases where legal work becomes a matter of life and death. And someone with appropriate protection services, Sarah added. Webb smiled. I understand your driver has received some additional training in the past 6 months. That was an understatement. While maintaining his cover as an Uber driver, Marcus had been working with Sarah's firm as head of security. His official title was Transportation and Safety Coordinator, but everyone understood what that really meant. Several of Sarah's clients had discovered that their Uber rides came with military-grade protection. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Arrived at Columbia Center. 5-star service guaranteed. Tell me about the Portland case, Sarah said, already knowing she would take it. Webb opened her briefcase and spread photos across Sarah's desk. A woman in her 30s with the determined expression that Sarah had learned to recognize in people who refuse to be intimidated by powerful interests. Amanda Rodriguez, environmental attorney, specializing in water rights and pipeline safety. She's been fighting a proposed oil pipeline that would cross 3 Native American reservations and 2 major aquifers. The threats started with emails and phone calls, escalated to vandalism of her home and office. Yesterday, 2 men attempted to force her into a van outside the courthouse. She escaped, but barely. Sarah studied the threat assessment reports, noting the professional nature of the attempted kidnapping. This isn't random corporate intimidation. Someone has studied our methods and is trying to recreate the Rodriguez organization, which is why we need someone who understands how these networks operate, Webb confirmed, and why she needs protection from someone who knows how to dismantle them. Sarah made her decision. Set up a meeting. Portland is only 3 hours by car, and I happen to know an excellent driver. 30 minutes later, Sarah settled into the passenger seat of Marcus's Toyota Camry, the same car that had saved her life 6 months earlier, now equipped with several modifications that she'd learned not to ask about too specifically. "Portland?" Marcus asked, pulling away from the building. "Portland," Sarah confirmed. "Another environmental lawyer in trouble, threats escalating to attempted kidnapping, possible connection to people trying to rebuild Rodriguez's network." Marcus nodded, already shifting into the alert, professional mindset that Sarah had seen during their first encounter. "Duration of assignment?" "Unknown. Probably a few weeks to investigate the threats and establish security protocols." "Accommodations?" "I'll need a hotel. You'll need whatever arrangement allows you to maintain surveillance and respond to threats." Marcus smiled. "I hear Portland has an excellent rideshare market." As they drove south on I-5, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a hard-working associate at a traditional law firm, focused on making partner and building a conventional legal career. Now she ran a firm that specialized in cases where lawyers needed bodyguards and clients required safe houses. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked Marcus. "The normal life, I mean, before all the classified operations and dangerous assignments." Marcus considered the question as he navigated through traffic. "I tried normal after I left the military. For about 18 months, I worked private security for wealthy executives and foreign dignitaries. The money was good, the work was easy, and I was completely miserable. Why? Because it didn't matter. Protecting someone's stock portfolio or their third yacht from protesters. There was no meaning in it. No one's life actually depended on what I did." Sarah understood. "Whereas now I wake up every morning knowing that the work matters. That somewhere there's someone like Amanda Rodriguez who needs protection so she can do her job without being murdered for it. And you get to maintain your excellent Uber ratings." Marcus laughed. 5 stars across the board. Amazing what good conversation and bulletproof windows can do for customer satisfaction. Sarah's phone rang, displaying Director Webb's number. She answered on speaker. "Sarah, we've had a development," Webb said without preamble. "Amanda Rodriguez was attacked again this morning. She's safe, but whoever is behind this is accelerating their timeline." "Where is she now?" Sarah asked. "Federal protective custody, but that's temporary. She needs long-term security that allows her to continue working on the pipeline case." Sarah looked at Marcus, who was already changing lanes to increase their speed toward Portland. "We'll be there in 2 hours." "Sarah," Webb continued, "the Portland police found something at the scene of this morning's attack. Professional-grade surveillance equipment and communications gear that matches technology used by Rodriguez's organization. So we're definitely dealing with someone trying to rebuild the network," Sarah concluded. "Or someone who was part of the original network and managed to avoid arrest," Marcus said grimly. As they approached the outskirts of Portland, Sarah realized that their work was far from over. The Rodriguez organization might have been dismantled, but the demand for their services remained. Somewhere, there would always be powerful people willing to kill to protect their interests, and ordinary citizens who needed protection to do their jobs with integrity. But there would also always be people like Marcus Torres, who understood that some things were worth fighting for, and lawyers like herself who refused to be intimidated by threats and violence. Sarah looked at the man who had saved her life while posing as an Uber driver, and who was now driving toward another dangerous assignment with the same calm professionalism he'd shown that first night. "Marcus?" she said. "Yeah? Thank you. For everything." Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression serious but warm. "Sarah, 6 months ago you could have backed down from the Henderson case when the threat started. You could have referred it to another lawyer and gone back to your safe corporate work. But I didn't. No, you didn't. You chose to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. That choice didn't just save your own life, it saved the lives of 11 other people who were marked for death." As they entered Portland, Sarah realized that her ordinary Tuesday night Uber ride had done more than change her life. It had shown her who she really was and who she was meant to become. Her phone buzzed with a new Uber notification. "Thank you for riding with Marcus. Please rate your driver." Sarah smiled as she clicked 5 stars, adding a comment. "Excellent service. Highly recommend for dangerous situations." Some reviews she thought couldn't adequately capture the whole story.